Some nights I find myself just wanting to play a really dumb video game. You know, it's been a day and now I just want to crash on the couch and boot something up that's unbounded from the shackles of complexity or clever design. I want junk food. I should eat something healthier, but I don't want to. There are no parents, and Tomorrow Never Dies is pure PS1 flavored junk food. This is a game where you wander around with the left stick and press the X button to shoot automatically targeted enemies, and that's kind of it. It doesn't quite work right, there's no reload button, even though you do reload, and it's not a game that you'd really recommend anyone to actually play, but on the right night, in the right mood, it's perfect. It's also the Bond game that had to take the stage after GoldenEye N64. Talk about a tough act to follow, and underneath the typical movie game shell here, you can at times sense its ambitions to try and run toe-to-toe with Rare's classic. So I went digging into its development and chatted to some of its developers, including its director Will Boddy, only to discover that making this game was a complete mess. It was in production for about 3 years, which was forever for a game in the 90s. In fact, it started development before GoldenEye was out as a PC-only Bond game completely unrelated to Tomorrow Never Dies. Publisher changes, direction changes, multiple delays, the works. In fact, this was delayed so much that it came out about a year after the film that it's based on did, instead releasing in the same week as the next Bond film, The World Is Not Enough, and that movie's tie-in game ended up coming out about a year late too. Very messy. If you're new here, hi, welcome, my name's Peter. I like James Bond movies and bad video games. Try the veal. I think that Tomorrow Never Dies is a delightful film, and it's up near the very top of my Bond film rankings. Like, sure, it's formulaic, but it's also incredibly punchy and snackable. Jonathan Pryce's unhinged, profiteering, media mogul villain plot has aged incredibly well. Brosnan looks like he's having a ton of fun while also nailing the serious moments. Michelle Yeoh's Wei Lin is delightful, and we all have Bond film rankings, don't we? So join me as we beat by beat dissect a game that was as much a victim of expectation as anything else. Let's look at the PS1 ways it adapts the film, and make sure to stay to the end where we get into some new info about the game from its developers, including some clips with my chat with its director. We'll paint a picture of how and why this game turned out the way it did, with a quick thank you to all the developers that were happy to give their time to some Australian YouTuber to talk about a nearly 25-year-old licensed game they worked on. The opening trailery video that plays when you boot this game up is rad. The quick snapping between gameplay and film with its electronic Bond theme track makes it seem like the coolest game of the 90s. Some of those who worked on this game had video editing backgrounds, and you can tell it's a vibe. Start the game and you'll be treated to a bad Judi Dench impression.
MI6 intelligence has confirmed that they are using a high-powered communications dish to illegally decode the positions of our GPS satellites.
To illegally decode. We're told to laser designate a satellite dish, loading screen, circle transition, Bond Coxie's PPK, or PK9 as the game calls it, and off we go. 3 things you'll notice right off the bat. 1, this is a third-person game, which feels like a bold call after GoldenEye. 2, this is incredibly tanky to control, oh my god. And 3, give this a listen. This soundtrack is amazing. It's credited to Tommy Tallarico Studios, with Joey Kuras being listed in the credits for sound design and sound editing, as you'd expect, though I'm told Tommy himself did work on the game. Let's not go down the Tommy Tallarico rabbit hole. Regardless, it's an incredible soundtrack. It goes places, it blends Bond and 90s electronic aesthetics in really fun ways, and I think if you could split the game up into its different ingredients, the soundtrack is the one thing it knocks out of the park. It's the special sauce if we're continuing the junk food analogy. I'm getting hungry. As you make your way through the snowy base, you'll start to settle into the mosey around and shoot dudes rhythm as much as these controls will allow. The biggest hang up I have with them is with the aiming. I wish there was some way to properly lock onto enemies, because you'll notice that the aiming reticule seems to come and go at will or disappear at the slightest turn. The circle button kind of targets the nearest enemy for you-ish, but it's just as unreliable. You can very easily waste entire clips while trying to center enemies. A GoldenEye-esque first-person hold down a trigger to manual aim is an option, but you'll lose half your health by the time that you crank the crosshair into place because enemies can melt you in a second. Instead, you'll need to strafe a ton to avoid getting hit, and you strafe using L2 and R2 because, despite supporting analog controls, the right stick doesn't do anything. We were well off standardized third-person shooter controls in 1999, and you can tell, but even at the time, critics roasted these controls, so it's not like they were up to par. Which is a shame, because the controls mar what should otherwise be a solid first impression, I think. Nothing mind-blowing, but this level is charming beyond just the music. The moving sunset sky and its pink glow reflecting throughout the vertex-lit level is lovely. Multiple helicopters fly in during gameplay to drop off enemies, which makes it feel very alive, and I particularly like how this cave tunnel feels and looks and breaks up the level. You eventually find a sniper and discover that if you shoot enemies from far enough away, their AI seems to break half the time. Like, this guy just forgets that he was shot and resumes his casual walk animation, and not long after finding the sniper, you laser the dish as per Not M's instruction, leave the area, and before you know it, you're escaping on a set of skis. With how heavy the walking feels, I kind of expected this skiing sequence to be an absolute disaster, but it's not. It gets a bit janky when you crash, but otherwise, if you can avoid crashing, it's quick and snappy where you can whack guys next to you, and there's more pleasant aesthetics to enjoy, and even some seamless cuts to in-engine cutscenes, including a finale which sees Bond fly away in a Union Jack parachute to end the mission. A high-octane finish to what is a Bond-flavoured cold open through and through, briefing aside, and it reflects an intention from the developers to make this game feel closer to a Bond film, even if none of what's happened up to this point actually happens in Tomorrow Never Dies. The next level, on the other hand, does follow the film's opening. You land at an arms bazaar after another briefing from Not Judi Dench.
Good job on destroying the dish.
Not the best. Also, chronologically, we have to be watching this briefing while we're in the sky in our Union Jack parachute, given that we're being congratulated for destroying the dish. Like, logistically, I want to know how this briefing is being transmitted to us. What are we even looking at? Like, is this multimedia CD energy screen a crazy looking briefcase with a display on the side? Whatever it is, it's very of its time. We touch down with the objective of taking photos of 3 military weapons, 2 of which are easy enough to find, and the third one requires you to use the camera's range to target indication number to realize that it's behind a wall, and then after trying to wrangle your way around the wall, you equip a mine and detonator using a very Metal Gear Solid inspired weapons and gadgets in either corner system to blow up one of these big crates, revealing the helicopter that you need to take a picture of, unless you just take a photo of it through the crates, which the game lets you do from the right spot. It was simpler times. This is a small, slightly satisfying moment that's a bit underexplained, and it's cool that this level has a lot of destructible bits, but this part sticks out a ton because it's such a one-off moment. This is the only time that you use the mines or the camera in the entire game. I guess it's trying to mimic the opening of the film where Bond is escaping out of the base, but it's just a bit funny to make these mechanics and these camera graphics and then to just not use them ever again. After taking the photos, we're treated to the first example of a Pierce Brosnan impression that's somewhat more successful, though the bar has been set real low.
Evacuate immediately.
I just need a little more time.
Cutscenes were better when they were like this. We have 2 minutes to kill dudes until a cockpit keycard appears, allowing you to get on the jet and shoot everything, like in the movie, and it actually lets you press buttons to shoot from the jet while it spins for a bit, and the game shows off all the destructibility while the frame rate hits the floor, and then we fly away and the Tomorrow Never Dies intro plays, complete with Sheryl Crow's song and video, but the developers are credited instead of the filmmakers, which is a neat touch. Now, I feel the need to asterisk every single line of praise that I have for this game with, but the controls are terrible. Feel free to insert those words at your own discretion, but otherwise, up until this point, I think that Tomorrow Never Dies PS1 has been reasonably successful. There's lots of visual and gameplay flourishes that keep it pacey and varied, and the broad statement that this intro makes when you think of it as the successor to GoldenEye is that it's attempting to be a more well-rounded video game adaptation of a Bond film. It's certainly attempting to set itself apart from what GoldenEye was in that way. That's not Not to say that it didn't take from parts of GoldenEye, but we'll get to that. More to come. That's something I've always wanted to say. It makes me feel like a news reader. Speaking of news, the next level is at Carver Media, which you might remember was run by Jonathan Pryce's evil media mogul, Elliot Carver. Also, who delivered this line better, Judi Dench or not Judi Dench?
Remind her. Then pump her for information.
Perhaps you can pump her for information.
So this next level is meant to be like a big corporate party for Carver's satellite launch, and yet it's instead a series of dark, goofy sci-fi corridors, which is kind of hilarious. Like, I don't know, I remember being excited to play this level for the first time, wondering how they'd handle something like a big party on the PS1, and yet it's just sort of not that at all. The most distinguishable thing about it is this hallway, which has Carver's face on it a bunch of times, and Carver's looking real cartoony and nothing like Pryce. After mindlessly shooting some dudes and questioning why the draw distance is so short compared to the outdoor levels, making the fog black is a choice too, like can someone turn the lights on, we run into Paris Carver, without Terry Hatcher's likeness, alone in a room that I think is meant to resemble the stage that Carver gives his speech on, or maybe it's his headquarters that he does all his video calls in. You can certainly draw parallels to imagery from the film on the walls here, but it just seems to be a really, really weird room with Paris standing alone in the middle of it.
I wondered what it would feel like if I ever saw you again. Now I know.
That's for walking out on me.
Carver enters the room and we're treated to his voice acting. Also, note how amazing this upcoming sinister laugh is.
Ah, Mr. Bond. Won't you allow me to give you a tour of the facilities?
From the cutscenes to the tanky controls to the warbly textures to the bad draw distance, this is exactly the game you picture when you try and visualize a janky third-person shooter licensed game on the PS1, and that brings me great joy. We wake up trapped and must laser our way through a mirror to escape, a mirror that works, by the way, take that ray tracing, and we shoot our way through a rather dour level that wouldn't look out of place in a System Shock game. Like, look at this computer terminal. Are we sure that Bond isn't on a space station? After shooting the mirror, you're meant to pick up your weapon on this table and shoot your way out of the level, but if you thoughtlessly run past that table like I did, because it just kind of looks like every other table, you'll end up running around like a headless chicken and losing all of your lives. This game has a live system where you respawn on the spot when you die, and if you run out of lives, you restart the level. So I used up almost all of my lives running around, which made a level towards the end of the game way harder because lives carry over between missions, which is an amusingly brutal punishment for something so innocuous. Bond is indoors again at the printing press, and the first thing you see is a civilian walking around who seems entirely unfazed by a handsome suited man pointing his gun at the ceiling. Kill too many civilians and it's game over, much like GoldenEye, and unlike Carver Media, this place actually sort of looks like a place that might exist. You shoot your way around the factory floor surrounded by officers to complete objectives. There's a fun detail here where you can see Dr. Kaufman and S. Isagura have offices here at Carver's newspaper. Satoshi Isagura is an extremely minor character at the start of the film.
Satoshi Isagura, chemical expert, wanted for the Tokyo subway attack. Currently working for the insurgent force in Zaire.
And yet he has an office at Carver's newspapers here. It's kind of assumed that he dies when Bond blows everything up in the plane. Dr. Kaufman, on the other hand, plays a much larger but still small role in the film. He kills Paris Carver, Bond's ex-lover, who we saw earlier in that wacky sci-fi room, and there's this brilliant scene where Bond executes the very campy Dr. Kaufman in revenge. It's one of Brosnan's best moments as Bond, and it's kind of assumed that Dr. Kaufman is a mercenary for hire, so it's very kind of Carver to also give him an office here. You retrieve the encoder from behind a painting by pushing a filing cabinet, which you figure out almost purely through trial and error. You wrangle with the bad aiming to shoot some dudes who fall into printing machines to get your "they'll print anything these days" moment, and you exit the level. Simple stuff.
They'll print anything these days.
In the film, this action sequence is a lot of fun, particularly because Michelle Yeoh is running around on the walls, but so far in this game she's nowhere to be seen. Moving on, the next briefing just tells you to take the night off and meet Paris at a hotel, maybe to pump her for information, wink wink, very subtle, and cool, sure, I'd happily relax at this hotel if every staff member wasn't armed and ready. 2 dudes in the car park have AKs, the receptionist is practicing his aim as you walk in, armed guards seem to be everywhere, and there's not a single patron anywhere. Remind me to never check into a hotel in Hamburg. At least the bartender doesn't have a gun.
Can I help you, Mr. Bond? I'm looking for Paris Carver. Have you seen her?
Yes, I believe she's waiting in your suite. And your presence is required there as well.
Never mind. Just like that, off we go. These 3 indoor levels play a lot worse than the opening 2 outdoor levels because they're so cramped and the draw distance is so low. Not to mention that they're so dark that you stare into the abyss and wonder why you're playing bad PS1 games for strangers on the internet. Wrestling with the unreliable auto-aim was hard enough when you could see more than 5 meters in front of you, not to mention that these levels are far less varied or pacey than the intro. No longer are we skiing or puzzling or blowing everything up. Now we're in the dregs, just shooting everyone and hoping that doors are unlocked. Spicing things up here finally is our first boss battle with none other than Dr. Kaufman, and this involves trigger strafing, spamming health packs, and just kind of hoping that the aiming behaves and you have enough health to win. Almost every boss battle is like this, but usually they're at least alleviated by some always entertaining voice work.
Ah, Mr. Bond. It's not nice to keep a lady waiting.
After defeating Kaufman, you go searching for Paris, and I gotta say, I just love a lot of the stylings on this level. Like, look at this PS1 piano, or look at this PS1 bathroom. It's so quaint and inefficient. Another bathroom opens with an unlocked double door to the hotel hallway and leads through to Paris's room, which is some very questionable architectural design, but regardless, Paris in the film is found dead here, but in the game, she's completely fine. You lead her out of the building and it's all good. She just lives, no worries, which is a strange choice from every angle you look at it. Paris's death drives Bond's motivation in the film, so I'm not sure why they changed that here, and it's also the only time the game uses an AI script that has someone follow you. It would have been so simple to just have Paris die. She doesn't even appear in the game ever again, so there's no narrative payoff to her living, but instead it's just like Paris is alive now, I guess. Interestingly here, they show a clip from the film of Bond escaping the car park in the BMW, tactically avoiding any shots of Bond in the backseat of the car because we're to assume that Paris is in there with him. This really isn't a problem that they needed to create for themselves. Finally, we're outside again, thank God, though it's still really dark. This time we're in the Swiss Alps, tasked with taking down Carver's henchman Henry Gupta, something that doesn't happen at all in the film. Henry Gupta is a henchman, but Bond doesn't go to the Swiss Alps at any point, nor does he take out Gupta. Carver himself does. See, the game up until this point has mostly followed the film in its typical movie tie-in game way. By that I mean it's just sort of making excuses to flood scenes in the film with enemies, but now we're just completely off course. We snipe our way through the early, very dark parts of this level using an infrared scope, which is a fun, techie, Bondy detail, before running into Q.
She now has improved machine guns, heat-seeking rockets, and stronger armor.
I think we should get along quite well.
Now, knowing that the music does a lot of the heavy lifting in this game, give this a listen. This makes me want to scull energy drinks and punch holes in drywall, and what a way to kick off the game's first driving mission. And only driving mission, I'll add, because this game loves doing things just once. And really, it's quite a fun little romp. It's very simple, a bit slower than you'd like, and it doesn't compare to the likes of later Bond driving levels like in Nightfire or Everything or Nothing, but judged as a progenitor to those, I think it's surprisingly fun as you shoot your way to the front of a convoy, avoiding mines being dropped. It's only a few minutes long, but we're in desperate need of a palate cleanser at this point, after all the dark and drab shooting, and it massively delivers on that. In another this didn't happen at all in the film mission, we find ourselves at a ski ridge in Hokkaido, tracking down none other than old mate Satoshi Isagura, so hey, I guess he survived the explodey intro, and with a ski resort comes more skiing. Only this time, instead of being light and fun, it's frustrating and awful. You're constantly smacking into trees, flying off cliffs, and get swamped by enemies. It's funny how much just having a poorly tuned level completely breaks what was pretty fun the first time around. Maybe this game should have stuck to its one and done rule here like it does with basically every other novelty mechanic. It's also a lot to go from the bombastic driving sequence to a bombastic skiing sequence. Like, these are best used to break up the shooting, so it's a bit of a waste to have them back to back. After dying a half dozen times and sitting through a bunch of long loading screens, you get off your skis and shoot your way through another snowy outdoor level. It's fine, if a tad forgettable, but at least we're outside. Eventually, we get a boss fight with Isagura, and give this a listen.
Ah, Satoshi Isagura. Seems you and Carve have been quite busy making headlines lately.
I presume you are referring to the nerve gas attack, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
I just can't help it. I must play these cutscenes. Off we go with the strafing, missing shots, and health pack spam, with the only key difference in this fight being that Isagura shoots something that creates these green clouds of smoke, which I assume was a decision made because he's called a chemical expert in the film. Good stuff. The next mission sees us return to something vaguely resembling the film's plot, where we're dropped via helicopter on Carver's tower in Vietnam. In the film, Bond and Michelle Yeoh's character Wei Lin are captured and delivered to Carver's office via helicopter, but here Bond's mission is to voluntarily land on the villain's tower on his own and just barge in to find a data storage room, which is an incredibly bold strategy even by 007 standards. We start on the roof and shoot our way into the offices, and the game's difficulty is really picking up a lot here, as you get shot from enemies above you that you can barely see, let alone aim at. I love this little cinema setup they have, and I'm enjoying this game's adherence to matching Bond's outfits to the film when it can. It's a nice touch. Insert asterisk here, but the controls are terrible. Eventually, we try to open this door, and because we need to rewrite Bond being captured, he gets whacked in the back of the head and awakens in Carver's office with none other than Wei Lin standing alongside him. No introduction, no idea who she is if you haven't seen the film, she's just there. And we're treated to more lovely Elliot Carver voice acting.
Mr. Bond, Miss Lin, welcome to Saigon.
I think this performance is best described as 2000's machinima villain chic. Another fun touch here is all the torture devices, calling back to the film, though here they're much more barbaric. We've turned a small case from the film into the desk's entire surroundings, which must raise some eyebrows amongst Carver's employees. I hit a dead end, which had me circling back through to the start of the level, until I realized that this is meant to be a pane of glass that I'm meant to shoot a bunch of times to break. I did shoot it when I first saw it, but it didn't react, so I just assumed it was nothing. Turns out I didn't shoot it enough. Wei Lin is outside after she just sort of disappeared earlier. No idea how she got outside, considering that I tried everything, and you both just sort of straight up jump off the building, I guess. There's no real context to any of this if you haven't seen the film. Again, you wouldn't even know who Wei Lin is. So wouldn't it be funny if you played as Wei Lin in the next mission? Could you imagine?
Wei Lin, we need your help. Carver bribed the Saigon military police. Their orders are to kill Bond on sight, so we've had to pull him out.
Wei Lin doesn't work for MI6, so this seems like a bit of an ask to me. Regardless, you play as Wei Lin for this next mission, who controls exactly like Bond, which is a bit of a missed opportunity considering her martial arts skills. I was really looking forward to this level too because it's set in the districts of Saigon, and this is where that action sequence takes place with Bond and Wei Lin on the motorbike, and this game's last driving sequence was so good, so of course this is instead a drab, dark shooting mission that's by far the worst, longest, and most frustrating in the entire game. Get ready to endlessly wander back and forth through these dark streets, hoping some enemy around the next corner doesn't aim punch melt you, because you can't move for half a second when you get shot, making this game feel even more gross to move around in than it already does. And then you come up against these turrets, which are frustrating enough on their own without the enemies standing next to them. The lack of a reload button becomes very apparent here too. You still reload when you're out of ammo or stop shooting for a few seconds, which leaves you vulnerable. You just can't do it on command. Layer on top of all of this, another strafey boss battle and an incredibly frustrating boss battle with a helicopter right at the end, which requires you to crank that manual aim into the sky and time your shot while tanking bullets, and it's a disaster of a mission. Remember all those lives I lost at Carver's party? They would have been nice to have at this point. I may or may not have used a cheat code here after getting thrown back to the start of the level one too many times. This made me want to put on a white button-up shirt and put pens in its pocket and get angry. It's a shame because in a lot of ways this level is actually very daring. You play as Wei Lin, which is cool, even if she's effectively a Bond reskin. There's civilians around that you need to avoid. There's a new enemy type with the turrets. Don't expect to ever see them again. There's not one, but 2 boss battles. There's even a lot of hidden secret areas and an openness to the whole map with multiple routes to get around that is refreshing for this usually very linear game. We're also treated to yet another one-off mechanic at the end where you do a button-matching hacking minigame for 30 seconds. Not sure if that was worth programming, but sadly this level is just tuned in all the worst ways. Finally, only a couple of hours into the game, we reach the final level on Carver's stealth boat, and I love this level only for its sheer volume of cutscenes.
See if you can find the engine room and stop this boat.
I know what to do.
Right.
You shoot your way through another System Shock level here, only it makes more sense this time because you're on a futuristic boat, and take a moment to take in the soundtrack and the footstep noises. The atmosphere building in this game, when it hits, actually really hits, and here it hits, at least until you hear Carver speak, and it all falls apart.
You'll never escape in time. Tomorrow never dies.
After a couple more strafey boss battles, one of which is with who I imagine was meant to be Stamper at one point, Stamper being the main henchman in the film who didn't seem to make it into this game, you've got 3 minutes to get to a terminal to cancel the missile launch and escape the level, and it's pretty challenging. Love how the timer keeps ticking down during this unskippable cutscene too, very cool. You get away, you get a screen telling you to give the hard difficulty a try, and back to the main menu you go. The hard difficulty is awful. You've got to abuse the broken AI by shooting them from way off in the distance, you've got to break every crate and barrel for health packs and ammo, you get instantly melted if you're being shot. It's not fun at all, and I can't imagine what the Wei Lin level is like on hard. There's no multiplayer, which is pretty wild after GoldenEye, though there's some leftover files on the disc that suggest a multiplayer mode was at least toyed with at some point. There's some cheat codes that are probably better described as debugging tools, and if you bought this game at full price after loving GoldenEye, only for it to be a clunky 2 to 3 hour campaign, you can see why it has the reputation it has. I spoke to someone recently who did just that back in the day, and they said that their heart sank like 10 minutes into playing this thing. Critics judged it appropriately, I think. They made a lot of unfavourable comparisons to Syphon Filter, which speaks to when this came out, Syphon Filter being a far more competent third-person spy PS1 game that came out about 9 months earlier, not to mention Metal Gear Solid coming out over a year before this. I do think that there's some things to like here if you're feeling charitable. I like the adherences to the film and being Bondy with lots of gadgets and locations. The skiing and driving bits are surprisingly successful most of the time, and aesthetically it's usually pretty strong, especially with that soundtrack, even if the graphics weren't close to being cutting edge. But just remember that asterisk about the bad controls. It's also hard not to be disappointed by the amount of setups with no payoffs. Let me use the sticky mines again, or the camera again, or let me drive the car again. Do something with Paris being alive. It's such a tease. I hadn't mentioned it yet, but the game also attempts to have stealth mechanics, and even has a very unreliable stealth kill mechanic that you could easily not know about, but it's so unreliable, and the stealth here is effectively broken. Clearly this isn't GoldenEye, but I do think GoldenEye made this seem worse than it probably is. It's clunky and crude video game junk food, and reflecting on it now during a PS1 nostalgia wave, it does have its charms. It also serves as a building block for where Bond games would go under EA. This is the first Bond game published by EA, and when you look at something like Everything or Nothing from 2004, it's in a lot of ways doing what this game tried to do, but just better. The ideas weren't the problem here as much as the execution. Maybe you could even read this game as being ahead of its time with how it was all cinematic and transitions between cutscenes and different game modes, like Everything or Nothing or something like Uncharted would later, but it doesn't sit quite right with me saying this is ahead of its time. It's giving it too much credit when something like Metal Gear Solid was out the year before this. It's also ironic that EA took this project from being the original Bond story that it started development as and acted as the primary driver to turn it into a movie tie-in game, because their most successful era with the Bond license would be all about original Bond stories. In fact, this isn't confirmed, but when I spoke to Will Boddy, this game's director, he vaguely recalled that this game started internally under the name Everything or Nothing, long rumoured to be what Eon stands for in Eon Productions, the production company behind the films. So to wind things all the way back, let's try and lay out this game's production timeline. In 1994, Black Ops Entertainment was founded, a game dev startup by some MIT grads who tongue-in-cheek called themselves the MIT Mafia. Black Ops was led by one John Boddy, twin brother of Will, who we'll be hearing from soon, and John was working on games at Virgin Interactive a few years after graduating, when he had a go at gathering some of his old MIT mates in Los Angeles and securing funding for a startup from Virgin. And so Black Ops kicked off, and its first 2 games were published by Virgin. Flying games Agile Warrior, F111X, and Black Dawn didn't set the world on fire, but Agile Warrior was effectively a third-party launch title for the North American release of the PS1, and Black Dawn released less than a year later, also on the PS1, which quickly framed Black Ops as an established dev for a console that quickly took off. That reputation was then massively reinforced by their third game for Namco, Treasures of the Deep, garnering very positive reviews, being an underwater action-adventure game. From there, Black Ops springboarded into releasing another 7 games on the system, most of which were for EA. One of those games was Tomorrow Never Dies, but Tomorrow Never Dies initially had nothing to do with EA. They were making it for MGM Interactive, the movie studio's small video game arm, and again, initially it was going to be a completely original Bond story, exclusively on the PC.
Our idea for the game was pretty obvious. You would probably do the same thing if you had the studio or the design, like, hey, we're not going to follow a movie. You know, we were told not to initially. We actually made up the design. We hired a Hollywood screenwriter. He didn't understand that we couldn't actually have a script this thick. You know, what's on the stage is on the page, kind of like they just couldn't get it because they were writing for like the big screw. Like, we just can't. It's a great story, but that's like its own game. That's like, you know, we probably just to pay it homage, we probably had characters, villains from the old Bond games like Jaws and Top Hat, just for like interest, like so people could kind of latch on. I think that was in there, but the story itself was it was a fictitious thing, you know. Or it might have been all new villains. I honestly don't really remember, but it was on the PC. It played okay, you know, making games on the PC, but even back then was, you know, kind of crude in terms of, you know, always upgrading and Windows 95. I mean, seriously. It was pretty brutal. Yeah, it was, but we did have the different modes. And again, it did actually look pretty cool. Like, remember the underwater mode, which later became kind of it wasn't the same engine used, but it was the learnings from that, which later became Treasures of the Deep, directed by Jose Vegeta, which was a Namco hit. And that was a critical game in terms of good critical acclaim. Frame rate was dodgy. I mean, it was just beautiful though. It was, we would just go, and it's underwater, so you could kind of get away with it, yeah.
If you look at all the pre-release advertising for the game, this underwater mode gets shown off a lot, with Bond either swimming or driving underwater. In fact, the game looks incredibly different to the game that eventually came out. We see some pre-rendered stuff, some first-person screenshots with gun models in the frame, and lots of Bond driving what looks like the BMW Z3 from GoldenEye, which is cool because that car was woefully underused in GoldenEye. In order to give the same look and feel as a Bond film, Black Ops has created scenes like this Swiss spa with scantily clad women. The most delightful of all the pre-release advertising has the late Desmond Llewellyn telling us all about it.
Hello there. Look, I'm just testing this highly explosive top-secret Tomorrow Never Dies video game for PlayStation. The game starts where Tomorrow Never Dies ends and challenges you to think, act and behave, well, possibly not behave, like James Bond. I must say, it's lethal.
Pause and enhance here, and you can see the game was called Tomorrow Never Dies, The Mission Continues, because at this point in development, the game was actually going to carry on from the film's ending. I like this in theory because the film does have some loose ends, most notably with a villain named General Chang, who just kind of disappears without a trace towards the end. That's a narrative thread that I'd wager they pulled on. When you take the levels that are intended to directly tie into the film and compare them to levels that stray from the film's path and were presumably repurposed from earlier versions of the game, the straying levels feel like they had far more time and thought put into them. The opening level with the Union Jack parachute, the driving convoy level, and the Japan level, these are all just bigger and more polished. Now, going off of previews and dates, it looks like this new Tomorrow Never Dies, The Mission Continues direction was taken under MGM before EA would get involved, though that may not have been the case. Maybe it was during discussions with EA. It's all a bit unclear, and this is where the timeline is at its most murky. It's hard to say anything definitive, but from what I understand, at some point EA took on the Bond game license and in turn took on this project, got Black Ops to finish off the game in 9 months as a direct tie-in to the film, and got it out the door.
But long story short, it was actually a moratorium. Nintendo had a 3-year moratorium where no one could make a Bond game on console. And only after that lapsed did EA jump in like the vulture. They're so apt. They were so EA, back then it was called EAD, EA Distribution. It later became EA Partners, and they swooped in and saw kind of like MGM Interactive, which was kind of like one of those typical movie studio, video game arms that really doesn't know what they're doing, but they do have some good IP, but it's hit or miss. And they came in and like, oh, we'll just take it over. They just threw a whole bunch of money at it, and I think it was almost 2 years before the game got turned into Tomorrow Never Dies and then was finished in 9 months. And I was the closer. I was the guy brought in to basically take the old game design. They're like, Will, MGM's like, we're not going to do this PC game. I'm like, what are you talking about? We've had 24 deliverables. Back then you had monthly milestones, right? Like we had 24 deliverables, and they're like, well, the good news is we're still going to get paid. The bad news is that they want a completely new game, and it's got to be done in 9 months. And we're like, all right, well, we're definitely not doing the game that we wanted to do, which was, over ambitious with like, we had underwater, we had driving, we had flying, we had skiing, now with Unreal Engine, that's basically almost expected. Back then it was a fucking pain in the ass, especially on PS1, as you can imagine. So we ended up cutting. We did keep skiing in Tomorrow Never Dies, which really people really love. That opening scene, it's still crude, but it's one of the rare moments where, he pulls the Union Jack. It's fucking great. At least we tried to do it, we tried to do it justice. I think people appreciated the effort, The game was definitely, I give it a B- if I'm being generous.
A fun fact that comes up sometimes when you mention this game on the internet is that Chad Stahelski is credited for working on its motion capture, who was the Keanu Reeves stunt double in The Matrix and the director of the John Wick films. Being early days for motion capture in video games, his work isn't immediately apparent in the final product, likely due to technical or time limitations, but it's a cool detail regardless. And Will spoke briefly about how, while the technical side of Black Ops' games wasn't always top shelf, they did pride themselves on pushing the envelope with things like motion capture and full motion video. Tomorrow Never Dies has a lot of FMVs and clips from the film, and for other games like Agile Warrior, they even shot mission briefings on camera. Now, the elephant in the room when it comes to talking about this game is, of course, GoldenEye. This was the first major Bond game after the GoldenEye phenomenon, unless you count James Bond 007 on the Game Boy, which is a surprisingly great Zelda-style Bond game. Watch my video on it. Tomorrow Never Dies was also the first Bond game on the PS1, giving those who chose Sony's console over the N64 a chance to suit up and suavely shoot bad guys too. Boosting sales was probably the most obvious way that GoldenEye influenced this game, but with GoldenEye releasing while this game was in development, it definitely influenced its design in some ways. You can easily draw some parallels, like how this game has civilians walking around, and listed objectives, and armor pickups, and destructible parts of the environment.
In the snow levels in GoldenEye, one of the ways that you could see the enemies would be the condensed breath. So the enemy, the NPC, might be around a ridge or a ledge, but if you saw the breath peeking out, that was a good way to tell. So that was kind of the level of detail, and we had that, I believe, in TND. It was more crude, but we tried. Snow footsteps in the snow, trying to do something like that. I don't know how good it's trails. That's actually very complicated. It's its own back then it would be its own 3-person team, like on one of the snowboarding games from EA, or those games. When we initially were making the Bond game, the generic Bond game, we all played GoldenEye. We love it, and we were happy that we weren't competing with GoldenEye. GoldenEye doesn't have a ski level. GoldenEye doesn't have underwater like we have. GoldenEye is a first-person shooter. So and they executed brilliantly. So the last thing we wanted to do was to do more of that, because we knew we wouldn't compete well with our people and budget and scale, whatever. So unfortunately, as all the design changed and coalesced into what became Tomorrow Never Dies, it was basically like a 3rd-person shooter. And so all the shooting mechanics were immediately compared to GoldenEye and failed miserably. They would have failed on their own, but we were well aware. We tried our best. That camera collision code probably took a man-year just by itself. It was such a mess.
It was an absolute crunch to get this game finished. I spoke to a couple of developers who remember the stress of making this game seemingly above anything else, and things like frustratingly limited dev tools and strict time sheeting and changes in publisher and direction, or working extremely long hours, and a lot of the team leaving during development must have been incredibly challenging. It's worth acknowledging the mental and physical toll that this development period had. A couple of months before release, EA asked Black Ops if they could relocate some of their team up to EA's Redwood Shores headquarters to get the game done, with the idea being that they'd centralize devs, QA, and localization teams while having producers and extra resources at hand to help get the game over the line. Black Ops, being an independent company, had no obligation to relocate anyone, so they named a ridiculous price that they didn't think EA would accept, only for EA to accept it, and so up they went, all expenses paid.
Just some preposterous number that no one should pay, because now we're remote. Now we've got logistical issues, but we totally got absorbed into the EA board. They said, no problem. We all moved up, room, board, everything. And for almost 2 months straight, we finished the game. We finaled the game in the freaking conference room on the 6th floor of EA. And that has its own crazy stories, because now we're remote, and we're still working with Tommy Tellerico. He was helping us with some design and sounds, but he was blacklisted by management because he was always changing shit at the last minute. It was crazy, dude. And we just it was the most nutso thing. But in the end of the day, EA was correct. We would have never finished, because they really needed us working with the QA and the localization team, and by just compressing that in the space to really being tight, working with us, we would have been doing the dev stuff and whatever. So it did make sense in the long run, and we managed to ship the game on time, and it filled, like I said, a huge revenue hole. Just getting that game out was, after that project, after it was converted, I think everyone had left, or many people left, and the lead artist, this guy was a really good artist. We'll call him JB. I was friendly with him, and he came to me. He's like, Will, you got to see the writing on the wall. I know this is your twin brother running the company, but this game will never come out. It's been 2 years now. You got EA mixing things around. I'm like, you know what? You're probably right. But as long as they keep paying those monthly milestones, which I might remind you, have continued uninterrupted for 25 months now, I'm going to keep doing my job, and we'll just see where the chips land. And 9 months later, the game came out. It was a huge commercial success, even though, I've worked on way better games. But in my opinion, and also we were following GoldenEye. Come on, it's like the comedian's worst nightmare. You're following Dave Chappelle. It was tough. We were competing with Rare. Even to this day, they're like the pinnacle.
My experience researching and playing Tomorrow Never Dies for this video has been a real the longer you look, the more you see sort of thing. I started by introducing this game as the simplistic PS1 third-person shooter that it fundamentally is, and I hope that I've peeled back its layers to reveal the stories and concepts and ideas that ultimately shaped this game into what it is. You see the skiing, or the driving, or the cutscenes, or the soundtrack, or that one hacking minigame, or the Wei Lin level, and sense the ways that this game could have been something more, and then you dig in to discover that during most of its development time, it was intended to be something very different and bold. You think about the turmoil that must have come with such an uncertain, intense, and messy dev cycle. The narrative around Tomorrow Never Dies PS1 and the stereotypes around licensed games pigeonhole it as a quick, rushed, cheap cash-in. It's easy to hand wave, and playing it doesn't do a lot to dispel that feeling, but the truth is, Tomorrow Never Dies had its ambitions, and had its blood, sweat, and tears poured into it. So to try and not pigeonhole the game as any one single thing, Tomorrow Never Dies on PS1 is a terrible follow-up to GoldenEye, a clunky, passable if you can put up with its controls, third-person shooter otherwise with a wonderful soundtrack, some fun ideas, and some now very quaint charms, a precursor to where the 007 video game franchise would go, and it has a story behind it that speaks to its unrealized ambitions, to the impact of direction changes and the importance of good project management, and to just how hard video games are to make. And there we wrap up the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. If you did, subscribe, like, comment, check out my Patreon. All that stuff helps. It's an easy way to support what I do here. And thanks to everyone who spoke to me about this game that worked on it. Will especially. It was delightful to hear more about how this game was made. And I've been kind of sick for a while, which is why this video has taken so long to come out, and which is why my voice probably sounds a little funky. Like, I'm recording this hoping that I don't sort of sound too stressed out. Like, I'm hoping my voice doesn't sound too stressed out. But yeah, this sort of kicks off my what I'm hoping will be my run through of Brosnan's 007 games, of the EA 007 games, because I did I covered all of Daniel Craig's games, the GoldenEye remake, Bloodstone, Quantum of Solace, and Legends. And now I want to circle back and go through Brosnan's games, because I think they're a lot more bold and interesting a lot of the time, especially once we get to the Redwood Shores games, like Everything or Nothing, or From Russia with Love. Nightfire is really good too. Basically, when we get to the PS2 and the GameCube and the Xbox, these games start getting real good. But we got to get through Tomorrow Never Dies and 007 Racing and The World Is Not Enough first. The World Is Not Enough's an interesting game. They made like 4 versions of it or something, so that'll be fun to talk about. Black Ops actually made the PS1 version of that game, and it's quite a bit better than Tomorrow Never Dies. You can sort of see how they progressed, and Will mentioned how they sort of rebuilt all of the tools for that game, and he thinks it's a lot better too. And yeah, hope you all enjoyed this video. Take care of yourselves. Leave a comment. Goodbye.